On today's episode of Heroes Behind the Badge, we're joined by Anthony Amerson, Executive Director of the National Black Sheriffs Association and son of a groundbreaking sheriff whose legacy still shapes law enforcement today. His story is powerful, timely, and deeply human. Let's get right into it.
Wow! In preparing for this this interview, I don't know where we start. So I'd like to start right now with what you are doing today as the executive director of the National Black Sheriffs Association, a fairly new organization, but I know you have a history with our founder, our CEO, our president, Craig Floyd, and that you share a lot of common goals with citizens behind the badge. So I thought we'd start with, and I want to tell our viewers, our listeners, stay tuned for this entire podcast, by the way. Stay tuned, because Anthony is going to tell a very inspirational, moving, touching story. Okay. I've heard parts of it, and it is a great story that you need to hear. So by all means, stay tuned for the whole podcast. But for starters, Anthony, again, a warm welcome to the Heroes Behind the Badge podcast. Tell us about the National Black Sheriffs Association.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for the very nice introduction and allowing me to speak about the National Black Sheriffs Association. The concept for the National Black Sheriffs Association was born back in 2022. My father was the first Black sheriff elected in the South since Reconstruction. During this ceremony, they basically dedicated a specific portion of Alabama Highway in his name. And during this ceremony, there were sheriffs that came from all over the state to be a part of this. And they gave me their own personal testimonies of how my father's election opened the door for them to go into law enforcement. And I was so inspired by that. As an adult, being able to hear these inspiring testimonies from folks, it really moved me, because I said that, we need to encourage more people to go into public safety and become public servants. It inspired me to a point where I said, I need to be able to leverage my professional experience, feeling a need for advocating for sheriffs more. So as a part of that, I kind of said, well, let me kind of figure out where the sheriffs are demographically and geographically, and figure out what their needs are. So I commissioned the Trailblazers for Justice research project, which was a 2-year effort to map out all of the African-American sheriffs, past and present. And this journey was, amazing. It took me to Fort Bend County, Texas, the grave site of Walter Moses Burton, first Black sheriff elected in the nation in 1869. And then to work my way back from 1869 to present, I was just touched by so many inspiring stories of individuals who stepped in to fill a role in the rule of law as sheriffs across the nation. As I started coming to present day sheriffs elected from 2000 on up, I just started conducting a listening tour to find out what were their challenges, what did they need help on, and I tell you, the sheriffs are having a difficult time dealing with reduced budgets and higher crime and low staffing. And I started taking all of this in, and I'm asking myself, what type of organization or platform was available for the sheriffs? Now, we do have the National Sheriffs Association, which has been around since 1881. We're very familiar with them and what they've been doing. We share a lot of commonality in issues that are affecting sheriffs. But our specific take on it was, we needed to have a way to provide a voice for African-American sheriffs, since there are 3,061 sheriff officers across the nation, yet there's only about 175 African-American sheriffs holding the office. Right. And surprising enough, when you look at the demographics, a lot of our sheriffs are serving in major urban cities across the nation. Dallas, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and other places. So,
right. What were, Anthony, it's interesting that you did this study. I find that fascinating. What were the top, say, 2 or 3 issues? You kind of alluded to it, but what are the top 2 or 3 issues that your organization is there to help out? What are the top 2 or 3 issues?
Top two issues would be the professionalization of the office. Everyone knows that sheriffs are elected officials.
Right.
There is no playbook on how to be a sheriff.
Right.
Normally, people that are ascend in the ranks from deputies to run for sheriffs, and in some cases, we have other law enforcement officials that decide to take up being sheriffs as well. But there is no playbook on how to be a sheriff. So the first thing we wanted to focus on: how can we advance excellence, and then also we want to attract the youth. We want to attract more young people to come into law enforcement. So our model is not only based on the sheriffs, but the teams that support the sheriffs.
Anthony, let me jump in here because you touched on something just a moment ago that really is close to the heart here, and that is the recruitment of young people to the law enforcement profession. This has taken a big hit. You and I had a discussion not too long ago. You reached out to me. We've known each other for a long time, but we share one very important common ground, and that is we've got to do more to recruit young people to come into this profession. The types of people that would have probably joined law enforcement years ago, but because of the defund and defame the police movement, law enforcement profession as a whole has taken a huge hit. We've lost some 40,000 law enforcement officers in this country due to either retention issues or recruitment challenges. And I'm so glad to hear that that's one of your top priorities because Citizens Behind the Badge, your organization, and many others are working so hard right now to try to get people to think of law enforcement as a sacred ground, as a place that is honorable, and that you can truly make a difference in this society. So I'm interested to know when you think of the defund the police movement, how much of a hit did that hurt not only law enforcement as a whole, but specifically in the black sheriffs of this country? You've been talking to them. What are they telling you about how much of an impact the defund movement has had on law enforcement in their areas?
That's a great point, Greg. And it's having a significant impact because what we're finding is that at the municipal level, below the county, that oftentimes those law enforcement officers, police chiefs, their agencies are subject to budget funding, which a lot of these municipal towns, small towns across the nation, aren't able to support. And as a result, they are forced to make financial decisions about how public safety is done, and often that encounters defunding police and replacing them with alternates, or for the sheriffs to absorb some of the responsibilities that are being left behind after these municipal police stations and what have you are defunded. So it's creating a strain. And it's not only creating a strain in the rural areas, it's creating a strain in urban areas too. Everyone has been watching the playbook on how recruitment has been going across the country. And in the words of retired Sheriff Jackie Barrett Washington, she was the first Black sheriff, female sheriff elected in the nation in Fulton County, Georgia. She says, there are not enough morally and ethically sound people that want to go into law enforcement. And we have to really look at ourselves self-reflective and find out, why is it that we aren't able to attract better quality people to the profession? One issue is funding and salary. We see now with ICE and the U.S. Park Services offering signing bonuses from $50,000 to $70,000 that they are taking the best of the best that want to go into the career field. And a large part of it is driven by the economics. People have to take care of their families. They have responsibilities, and the salaries at the municipal, county, state level are just not as attractive. And we've watched the economy change, and we've watched the impact, and it's not going to get any better.
Yeah. What do you think about standards for law enforcement as part of this recruitment effort? What we've seen in some areas anyway is a reduction in standards, a lowering of standards. Physical fitness standards all of a sudden are gone by the wayside. in terms of the backgrounds of applicants. Did you do drugs? Well, it used to be a non-starter, and if you had, and now we've loosened those criteria. We could just go on and on, but are you seeing the standards of law enforcement for purposes of better recruitment being lowered in with the black sheriffs that you're talking to around the country?
Yes, everyone has had to adopt that strategy because there are just not enough people that are interested in applying. And then after they apply, they recruit, and they complete their initial assessments, how do you retain these folks? To become a law enforcement official requires you to take on a different type of lifestyle, uh, one that requires you to have discipline, one that requires you to have some type of moral responsiveness about community and personal values. And what we're finding is that there's just not enough people that have those type of characteristics for law enforcement. So as a result, they have had to lower standards. Some of the things that you've mentioned are some of the areas where they have had to lower standards. But the problem is that just as easy as you can recruit them, these same folks normally get kind of washed out through disciplinary actions and other infractions because of those same characteristic traits that we are bypassing just to get the numbers. There's just not enough folks that want to go into it that fit that criteria. And we're going to see more examples of law enforcement officers having bad conduct, misconduct, alcohol abuse. It's a difficult job being in law enforcement, not only on the individual, but on their family.
So I just want to chime in here because this is an interesting topic, and I can actually speak from personal experience. So in 1980, I was hired by the Metro-Dade Police Department in Miami, Florida. And at that time, they were recruiting 2,500 new cops. The city of Miami Police Department was trying to hire approximately another 1,000 cops. So precisely what we're just discussing about lax and lowering of standards, a lot of the standards were lowered then because crime was off the hook down here. And the problem that I see now is, we always talk about in life and in the world how, you have to pay attention to history and you have to learn from history. And we've kind of come back around here. We've allowed misdemeanors, and we've allowed some felony charges. If you have a DUI passed, if you have drugs like Craig commented, those aren't eliminating factors anymore to getting hired, and it's a really, really tough time. And I would further say, because back when I first got hired, it was honorable to be a cop. And I think it's not just about salary and money and bonuses right now. It's about respect, and it's about who's got your back and who's supporting you, and the politicians not badgering and demonizing the police, because that's the other thing. We talk about defund, but now it's really demonizing. I wouldn't go back to law enforcement if they paid me $1 million a year to do it right now. And I sit around with a lot of my friends, and they're like, I don't want my kids going into law enforcement. And it's not about the money, because it was never about the money in law enforcement. It was about doing the job. It was about serving your country and your community. It was the honorable thing to do. Right now, it's about respect and not demonizing the police, and having effective law enforcement leaders, whether that be a sheriff or a police chief that's got the balls to stand up and do the right thing, and politicians doing the right thing.
And we're seeing a lot of politicalization that the sheriffs are having to deal with from their government entities that support them in funding. They're always cutting the sheriff's budget. And of course, jails are a sore thumb for any sheriff. Most of them have been outsourced to Department of Corrections in different cities to run and operate. However, it's expensive to maintain the infrastructure for jails. One of our sheriffs down in New Orleans, if you've seen the national news, had a jailbreak where some inmates escaped and were at large for a long period of time. But when they started diving down deeper into the maintenance issues at the jail facility, there were a lot of maintenance issues that had not been addressed, in part because of funding disagreements with some of the local governing bodies. And it's expensive to run jails. Why do you think the federal prison has privatized so many of them? It's because the infrastructures themselves deteriorate so fast that you have to rebuild it. And these are the same thing that my father had to deal with in the 1960s. His jails were subject to lawsuits and complaints by prisoners because the county refused to actually fund the maintenance repairs or to create a structure, rebuild and create a structure that could be advanced enough to hold inmates as well as to be able to operate with some type of efficiency. And it's just one of those issues that a lot of politicians are using to take funds away from the sheriff that they previously had allocated to them. And this is a method of defunding them is by reducing their funding, telling them to do more with less. And this is only going to set up eventually what we know is going to be the onset of AI technology taking over a law enforcement role in our society.
We're going to talk about that in a bit, but here we are. We've talked about you being the executive director of the National Black Sheriffs Association. It's a newly formed organization. We've hit on your father. There was a sheriff. We're going to talk more about that, but we haven't talked about you. So who are you? And what's your background, Anthony, and what got you here to where you're at today?
I am an author, I'm a historian, I'm a retired Foreign Service officer from the United States Agency for International Development. I am also an advocate for sheriffs and public safety. I got into this because during my experience while working in the government as a Foreign Service officer, I had the opportunity to live abroad for more than 10 years. And I worked in these developing countries where the United States was trying to actually rebuild countries and provide better services to its citizens. I had an assignment in Afghanistan, 2 assignments in Pakistan, in Ethiopia, and in Haiti after the earthquake. And what I saw in all of these different country scenarios was basically there was a lot of conflict, people that were not happy with government because the government wasn't able to provide services. And public safety is a service that the government has to provide. And when it's absent, it creates chaos. It creates people breaking laws. It creates the absence of rules and regulations for how the society operates. So I saw that and I saw the effort of some of the great development professionals that the government has into solving some of these problems. What we found out in Afghanistan was it was much more cheaper to build schools and hospitals and provide services to people to prevent them from becoming radicalized into terrorist organizations than it was to put military troops on the ground. And we know that after the Afghanistan and the Iraq conflict, the United States government spent roughly $17 trillion on both of those type of engagements, whereas a development perspective would have saved millions and millions of dollars and promoted more long-term stability. And taking that example and applying it to the society that we're in the United States, and I would suggest everyone, if you have opportunity to go outside the United States and see how other people live, you'd be shocked in a lot of cases. But in particular, when we are watching Richard Wolff, the U.S. Economist, has been talking about we are on a collision course for economic hardship. We're seeing increases in repossessions, evictions, and job loss all across the nation, which is going to create food insecurity. Same type of issues that I saw in these developing countries. What is the law enforcement community, or are they prepared to deal with this issue? We have never seen it before. We saw a little bit of it in COVID when there were grocery stores that were bombarded with people buying toilet paper and other food items they needed. But what is it going to look like with the ending of SNAP benefits and with people's cars being evicted and no jobs? And there's no replacement plan for people to get reemployed. What are we going to do? What is the state of public safety going to look like? And I would tell you that it's going to put more strain on existing resources than we've ever seen before.
Craig, jump in there.
We're not prepared for it. And, Anthony, we touched base on those issues in our recent discussion. And from that discussion, we talked about something that Kathy Lanier did when she was chief of police in Washington, D.C. I admire the hell out of Kathy. I think she had a lot of great innovative ideas that were implemented and that worked. And one of her philosophies was that the police car should be a billboard to people in that community that if you need help of any type, not just crime related, not public safety related, but any help is needed, where do you turn? Most people in that dire need don't know where to go in the government bureaucracy. It's so confusing to all of us. And yet, that police car is that one symbol, that one visible symbol of government. And you should be able to go to that police officer in that patrol vehicle, tell them you have a problem, tell them you need help in some way. They may not be able to provide that help themselves, but they can help you get the assistance you need and guide you through that very confusing bureaucracy. I loved her philosophy, and I know you and I discussed it. You seem to think that had a lot of legs as well. And I think it speaks to your point that over time, we may find ourselves in dire straits, especially in rural America, where a lot of these Black sheriffs serve. And I think we need to do something to help those people that are in need now, but maybe in more need later on. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that concept.
Absolutely. You're right. Law enforcement and the identity of law enforcement as a safe space for citizens is a truly benefit of being in uniform. You have so much access to people in need. I always tell folks that when you talk about law enforcement officers, they see people at every spectrum of life, from almost dying to people celebrate. You see every level of issues that people go through in life. And food insecurity will create a lot of chaos. It will. What we have done at the National Black Sheriffs Association is develop a program where we're looking to attract more partners, more non-traditional partners. When we say we have a lot of law enforcement folks, but what are the other partners that have a role in building resilience in communities? Because essentially that's what we want to do. We want to build more resilience. We want people to stay at home. When people stay at home, they're less likely to do crime. If they have food, water, a roof over their head, they're more inclined to stay in the house. And that's what we really want to promote. We have developed a Decade of Change program, which is going to provide mobile health and dental services as an outreach effort for the National Black Sheriffs, where we will actually go into communities, set up these free services, provide food subsistence, as well as social service partners to help folks that are in need. We see a lot of churches doing this right now. Churches are valuable partners. We see that there are more partners out there, some of the corporate partners that have a social responsibility to help us do this, because government services, as we know previously, are going away. So now it's time for our non-traditional and our corporate partners to join up with law enforcement to help us build more community resilience by providing services directly to them.
So, Anthony, I want to jump back in here. We have our personal on-staff AI king, Mr. Dennis Collins, and Dennis wants to ask you about your thoughts about AI in law enforcement.
Well, thank you, William. That's very nice. And I want to take a quick pause here before I ask Anthony this question. We're listening today to Anthony Amerson. Anthony is the executive director of the National Black Sheriffs Association. And this podcast, Heroes Behind the Badge, is brought to you by Citizens Behind the Badge, the leading voice of the American people in support of the men and women of law enforcement. You can get involved. Citizensbehindthebadge.org. Or some people call it .org. Okay, either way, citizensbehindthebadge.org. Go there. You can learn all about Citizens Behind the Badge. You can learn about the hundreds of thousands of people who already support us. You can become a supporter. And you can also click subscribe, like, and follow to this podcast. Anthony, you piqued my interest. And I am a huge AI person, and I'm curious as to your thoughts about how you see AI fitting into law enforcement. And you painted the picture of, is law enforcement ready for what's about to come? And I think we're all sitting here saying, not so sure. Not so sure. Do you think AI, and how do you see AI fitting into the future of law enforcement?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, I spent a lot of time overseas in Asia. And if you ever go to any of the countries in Asia, you see more automation and robotics than you will see anywhere in the United States. Not only from fast food restaurants, but um, services. I think I was in a business class lounge in one of the airports, and they had a valet come around, a robot that was offering drinks and taking up trays. And it's just been expanding so rapidly in Asia. We're so far behind, but AI is going to take a significant role in law enforcement, and especially in rural America. Right now, Miami-Dade County Sheriff's Office has been rolling out a driverless patrol vehicle that will
Saw that.
perform patrol duties in the Miami area, be responsive, and things of that sort. So we're already seeing it roll out. What does this mean for local law enforcement officers? Well, if you don't have the recruitment numbers, then you're going to have to come up with some type of replacement of services. You're going to see more drones used to cover more coverage, provide more surveillance. You're going to see subscription services for Ring cameras becoming more privatized. You live in an area that doesn't have a lot of police support and they don't have the resources, you'll be able to get a subscription off of a Ring camera device that will be able to monitor your space and connect with law enforcement if you have a problem. You're also going to see the rollout of more cameras. There's so much technology in the smart camera area, and cameras have been shown to be a significant deterrent for crime all across the world. In fact, in some countries that don't even allow police officers to carry firearms or wear firearms illegal, cameras are the leading asset that are helping them to deter crime and also to catch crime. You go in places of Thailand, they have a camera network system set up to, you can create an offense in one area and cameras will track your path all the way to your home, and officers can go right there and arrest you or detain you or what happens. So cameras are going to play a significant role, and the technology is growing. And last but not least, we're going to see more chat bot services where you will be able to go into, for example, your sheriff's office website, and they'll have a chat bot, what will essentially be like a 911 operator. We see these chat bots popping up on our websites where they'll give like customer service engagement or customer service responses. You're going to see the same thing off of the 911 component where you would type in and say, hey, I'm sick, I need an ambulance. And then the chat bot will go through prompts that will find out what type of services you need and then connect you to those services who will be dispatched to come provide you assistance. So I see that the cameras, the driverless vehicles are all going to be how we roll out AI into law enforcement.
Anthony, I love your vision.
Let me jump in related to one of the comments Anthony just made. Changing subjects for a moment.
Yes,
Mental health is one of the pillars of the National Black Sheriffs Association. I know it's also a pillar of Citizens Behind the Badge. The mental health wellness of our officers, so important. Police suicide has become rampant in this country for a variety of reasons, especially the stress of the job, the number of traumatic events that an officer has to deal with. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in that area.
Well, we have attracted mental health professionals that want to come and help us kind of be a part of our mission to advance leadership. And a part of advancing leadership is talking about real mental health issues and the impact mental health has on officers doing their jobs. We talked previously about the screening and the need to recruit more people, but there's a lot of stress and trauma that goes with being in law enforcement. And as a part of the leaders, we have to incorporate specialists, technicians, therapy, uh, have access to resources for our law enforcement staff so that they can maintain the mental health and wellness they need in order to do their jobs. And we're also promoting more physical fitness, which tends to help with the mental disposition of folks, as well as wellness lifestyles. You cannot go into law enforcement and not maintain a healthy body, a healthy mind. It requires a different lifestyle, which is one of the reasons why we can recruit people, but we can't retain them, because not everyone is willing to make that sacrifice to maintain themselves. And we have seen that some of the law enforcement offices, like, for example, I'm here in Washington, D.C., so the Metropolitan Police Department, they have officers that are working excessive amounts of overtime. We're like, okay, fine, this person wants to, work overtime. But we know the long-term impact and the productivity on people that overwork themselves. They become burned out. They start making mistakes. They lack discernment and judgment because they're just mentally exhausted. So mental health is a priority for us, and we have attracted some mental health professionals that want to partner with us to address some of those issues, and we will incorporate them into our training program for our sheriffs. And by the way, we have started a sheriff's academy, which is focused on developing leadership for our newly assigned sheriffs and for individuals that want to go into run for office for sheriff. And that's an important part of it.
Excellent. Dennis and Bill, I don't know if I've shared the backstory with Anthony and myself, but years ago, I can't even remember how long ago, maybe 10 years but the bottom line is Anthony contacted our office at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. We were in the midst of building a National Law Enforcement Museum, and he was very kind. We were trying to collect artifacts that told important pieces of law enforcement's history. And Anthony could not have been more generous. He shared with us a number of artifacts related to his father, Lucius Amerson, the first Black sheriff since Reconstruction in the South, elected, I think, in 1966. And we touched on that earlier in our conversation, but I think it's important to get into it a little deeper. Anthony, your father's story is amazing. We had a Black sheriff, since 1877, I think you said something along those lines. And all of a sudden, your father gets the idea of, I'm going to run for sheriff in the South, the deep South, Macon County, Alabama. And I can't imagine what motivated him to do that. The Ku Klux Klan obviously had its teeth out in those days, causing trouble for Blacks across the South. And yet your father courageously, I think, ran for sheriff and became the first Black sheriff since Reconstruction in the South. And we're so honored. Bill and Dennis, I don't think you may not know this. We have a section in our National Law Enforcement Museum that tells the story of Lucius Amerson. And we're very proud to be able to do that. But Anthony, tell us a little bit about the history of your father. Why in the world would a Black man in the Deep South decide to run for sheriff, and how was he able to win?
Right. The short answer is he was at the right place at the right time. Interesting story about my dad that I learned is that he was born in 1933, which was right near the end of the Great Depression. And he had 7 siblings, 5 brothers, 1 sister, and himself. And each one of his brothers eventually left the rural town they grew up in and went into the army, because around that time, World War II was starting to get generated. And he saw his brothers come home with money, experiences, excitement about life. And let's face it, after the Great Depression, the country was decimated financially. And he saw the army as his way to see a different part of the world. So with his mother's permission, he joined the army at 17 years old. And around that time, the Korean conflict was just starting up. It followed World War II shortly after, early 1950s. So they deployed him to Korea, where he served as an infantryman. Now, these were hardened veterans who had come out of World War II and were now going into the Korean War. So that group of men had a certain shrewdness about themselves, about being a soldier. It was a very hard life. And as I said, my father was just 17 years old. Can you imagine a 17-year-old today going into combat and living there? So he stayed in the Army for 8.5 years, had different assignments, and then eventually he got out and says, I want to continue my education. So he used the GI Bill to enroll at Tuskegee Institute, now called Tuskegee University, to pursue a degree in electronics. Well, this is around the 1960s, and around the 1960s was a difficult time in American history where there were clashes, domestic clashes internally that created a lot of conflict across the country. You talked before about the Klan and other social changes that were taking place, but on these college campuses, they were ripe with activism. You know, students that were promoting voter registration, equality of rights, sit-ins, demonstrations, all of those things are part of the 1960 civil rights movement. We saw that. He was pretty much not focused on that part of activism. He was like, I'm here to get my education. I've been in war. I don't have time for these things. But unfortunately, there was a student on the campus who was brutally murdered while trying to test the Public Accommodations Act. Public Accommodations Act basically said that public bathrooms could not be segregated by color. And there was one gas station next to the bus station in the town where my dad was going to college at. And one student activist wanted to test it and he wanted to go use the bathroom. He was refused. There were arguments ensued and he was killed. This created an outrage and a protest of the students. And as a result, my father saw that this is an opportunity because the local sheriff did not do much to provide transparency or to provide sense of equality in the person that was arrested. This person, by the way, that killed this student was eventually exonerated by an all-white jury. But he says, after being in war, and soldiers get exposed to working with different people and personalities. And this was one of the values that he brought with him after he finished serving in the military. And he saw the sheriff's office as an extension of a paramilitary type of organization similar to the Army. Uniform, structure, discipline, firearms, those things were very common to him. So it just so happened that the Voters' Right Act had recently got passed, which provided more access for African Americans to vote. And the students were already galvanized. So he was kind of at the right place at the right time when he decided to run for sheriff, because his whole thing was, I want to have more opportunities for myself in the future. And he saw running for office as sheriff as one of those ways he could do it. So he ran successfully. He was elected. Not to say after he was elected that things were peachy keen, but it was a rather kind of highs and lows after he got elected. Initially, after getting elected, he was sought after and gave over 100 speaking engagements to other Democratic candidates that were continuing to run for office. He was invited to the White House to meet President Lyndon Johnson. At the time, the Democratic Party was kind of galvanizing voter registration, and they kind of invited a lot of newly elected African-American leaders to the White House to meet the president and talk more strategically about how to increase voter output and things of that sort. But then there were some issues that were really, as I learned about it was really challenging for him. He had a shootout at the jail one night where an inmate got a hold of a firearm and started shooting and caused the chaos and caused all the law enforcement from the state and other counties to come in. He had a car chase in the middle of the night where he almost lost his life chasing some kids that were in a runaway car, going down these streaming two-lane highways. As a result, his car was in an accident. It ran off the road, caught on fire. 75% of his body was burned, and he had to be hospitalized. And he just so happened to be in an election year, and he won an election from his hospital bed. So,
I'm curious, though, just to cut in for a moment. How does a black man win an election in the Deep South in the 1960s? That just seems unfathomable.
Easy. The voter demographics in Macon County was 85% black. So, like I said, he was in the right place at the right time, and all of these students were so galvanized. Even today, look at some of the protest gatherings that are happening. People are galvanized. It was that same energy that was going on in the 1960s. And the students were like really pushing voter registration, going out uh, house by house, individual by individual, getting them registered to vote. And that was when I talked about my father was in the right place at the right time because historically, there were some areas in the South that was like, even though we have the numbers to elect more Black officials, we're just not ready to do that because it would upset the status quo in the relationships. But at this time, in Macon County, by it being primarily African American voting base, there was the time and they all came out in overwhelming numbers and elected my father. It was more like this was their first battleground in testing their ability to galvanize voters by getting him elected. So
We see it spread to other southern areas, other southern counties. Were they electing Black sheriffs soon after your father?
absolutely, absolutely, there were several in Alabama, in other parts of the country that were electing Black sheriffs after my father's election. As I mentioned, he was in high demand as a speaker for different cities that wanted to galvanize voting. So they were spreading the word. The Democratic Party had a network of leaders across the country that were kind of promoting more voter registration and galvanizing voters. And they basically tapped him into a role where he was sent and dispatched to go and speak churches, schools, going to elected officials, making public appearances to talk about the importance of voting, the importance of getting folks registered to vote, and the role that they could take in performing in the society. So it wasn't so difficult for him to do because of the location and the Democratic support for candidates at that time. And it helped a lot because after he was elected, there were hundreds of sheriffs elected all the way to today where we have more than 175 African American sheriffs serving in office, with 19 of those being African American females.
So I want to jump in, Anthony, and you hit on this a little bit about the car chase, and your father was severely burned, 85% of his body. Clearly, he survived and went on. But you mentioned earlier on that you were a year and a half old when he became sheriff, and he was sheriff for 20 years there. So it was all of your developmental years. So you must have heard lots of stories, been around the cop shop a bunch of times, met all the other deputies and cops. Everybody loves a wild police story. Of those 20 years that you remember being around your dad, what's the craziest story?
Well, as because of the age that I was at, I didn't really have like firsthand account of some of the, bizarre incidents he happened. But my father was he was a type of person where he kind of archived everything about his life in great detail. News articles, photographs, letters, all of those things he kept in his possession. And once I started diving into the research about his life, it really opened my eyes about the impact he had across the country. I think the most bizarre story that really inspired me to really go forward with promoting my father's legacy was the car chase. Because it was like one of these things out of a movie where, in the middle of the night, you get a call about some criminals that are kind of in a high speed pursuit through your county, and you kind of join in on this ongoing pursuit down these winding country roads, only to be collide with the vehicle that was in the way, and as a result, being forced off the road and your vehicle catching on fire. 75% of his body, still badly burned. He was hospitalized. His firearm of choice was a 357 Magnum. And that damaged firearm is also archived in the National Law Enforcement Memorial Museum for folks to see. But that really showed me a lot about my father's courage, because it's difficult to take on some of these jobs. And that was a bizarre story for me to read about because I had the police reports, I had eyewitness, and then I got letters from people all across the country who sent to my father, wishing him well, speedy recovery. And the interesting thing about the way people correspond back then than they do today, where we have emails and texts, everyone was handwriting letters and they were signing them. And it was so interesting to see these letters signed from people all over the country, wishing you speedy recovery. We thank you so much for what you're doing. Signed, Joyce K. White, Oregon, the state of Oregon, Denver, Colorado. So it was so interesting how people put their identity in some of the written correspondence that they sent to him. And it was like people were really supporting not only him as an individual, but law enforcement. They were supporting law and order. And that covered all demographic backgrounds and all colors. So, man.
So you mentioned that he chronicled and saved and wrote down many of his experiences as a sheriff and during your childhood. That ultimately led to a book that the two of you did, isn't that right?
Yes, yes. The book is called Great Courage, and it's a story, the autobiography of my father, first Black sheriff elected in the South after Reconstruction. We have it's available on our website in case you want to get a copy. This book is basically my father speaking to people today. And I recently discovered letters that he had wrote saying he wanted to archive his life in a museum. And that's the next subject that I wanted to introduce about the Black Sheriff's Memorial that we built here in Washington, D.C. to honor him as well as other Black sheriffs in the history of America.
Is this a memorial that you're working on?
Yes. We've been working on it for about 4 years now.
Okay.
It's in Washington, D.C. It's got some static displays of some famous Black sheriffs of past. It's got some military memorabilia where you can see kind of tracing my father's time in the military, the different units, the different assignments. And then it's got some of his personal artifacts that are going to be in display. Letters, signage, photographs. All of these things are going to be provided to the public. And it'll have a QR code system where you can go and get more information about some of the displays and artifacts. And we're scheduling to talk in February of next year during Black History.
Wow, outstanding. I want to know, and I wish I had the number in front of me, but there are literally thousands of names of Black law enforcement professionals on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. And as I said, we have this special exhibit in our National Law Enforcement Museum that focuses on Lucius Amerson and the story of the first Black sheriff since Reconstruction in the South. But clearly, Black law enforcement officers are prevalent in every community in this country. They're serving, they're protecting, and they're sacrificing. And I'm so glad to hear there's going to be a memorial specifically devoted to Black law enforcement professionals, their stories, their sacrifice, very important part of what we're trying to do here. Your father was an amazing man and very courageous, but I have to believe that there were times, despite the 80% or more Blacks in his county, that the Klan and other whites with their bigotry at the time must have made it difficult for him. Are there any stories that come to mind when we talk about the challenges he faced from the bigotry in the South at the time?
Well, believe it or not, most of the bigotry that he faced was from other African-American people.
Huh.
Okay. The shootout that I talked about involved an African-American man who was drunk and was being processed into the jail, disarmed the deputy, and started shooting. And he was calling, and my father happened to be in the jail at that time, and he was calling him by name, come out. No, want to have conflict. Well, my father was able to escape through an exit in the jail, and this guy basically ran out of bullets. And after he ran out of bullets, he changed into a somber tone. When he came outside and saw all of these law enforcement folks in the middle of the night with lights shining on the jail and guns drawn at him, he changed his perspective then, and he was more humbling. But for some reason, during his surrender, some of the other law enforcement officials who knew this individual did not want to handcuff him and restrain him after just taking siege of the jail. And my father's response was he used his firearm to basically strike this individual because he felt like he was still a threat and he was not being restrained. And this individual went and filed a civil lawsuit for police brutality against my father.
Wow.
And believe it or not, it was the National Sheriff's Association that stood up for my father and all law enforcement officials, because they said, if we now penalize sheriffs for doing their authority, it would create a legal precedence where it would make other sheriffs vulnerable if they were in the same situation. And his case was dismissed as a result of the advocacy from other law enforcement officials and from an attorney general at the time who was very supportive of what my father was doing. So, believe it or not, most of the conflict that he faced was from the African American community than the white community. After the 1960s and then went into the 1970s, it was kind of more normalized to have black sheriffs because, for the most part, most of the economic bases in the South were not in black counties. They were in more of the major counties in the South, like Atlanta, Birmingham. So those were areas where some of the people in the community decided to retreat to, and they just basically left the black counties alone, have their own leadership, own mayors, things of that sort. So it was a very interesting part of history to see the dynamics of people from his own race were opposed to or were trying to devalue his authority as a sheriff.
Yes, I know you and I were discussing some of the reforms that we learned about that were made. Perhaps you want to get into that a little bit with Anthony here as we come to a close of this very intriguing discussion. Yeah, I think the idea was he took a lot of the military experience and what he had learned, working in the military, and applied some of those disciplines, codes of conduct, etc. I think he was very innovative in terms of what he did as sheriff, not just being the first black sheriff, but somebody that really started to make the Macon County Sheriff's Office more professionalized.
Yeah, absolutely. The experience that he took from the military was so invaluable for him even after he left. Having rules and regulations, standard operating procedures, uniformity, code of conduct for behavior for his deputies was kind of the foundation that he established for his office. And it allowed his office to scale up its operations very quickly. Originally, his staff was maybe 3 people, and then eventually they got 5, 6, 7, and then other people were added to it. But his reforms, basic as they were considered, were very instrumental in setting up the basic operation for a sheriff's office. Now, most of the sheriffs in the country today don't have jails, but back then in those rural areas, the sheriff had the jails, they had to support the courts, they had to support evictions, they had to support all of these other services. So him having the reform measures that he put in place were very instrumental in allowing him to do his job more efficiently, as well as create more transparency in the community.
Excellent. Just a closing comment, really, and I'll turn it over to Dennis to get us out of here. But the bottom line is Citizens Behind the Badge is proud to be able to partner with the National Black Sheriffs Association. There's a lot of common ground, certainly the mental health issues, certainly the recruitment of good young people to become part of the law enforcement profession, strengthening the relationship between the community and law enforcement. All right. And a lot of that deals with race. There's been some racial tension, obviously, in communities around this country as some of these high profile incidents have gotten a lot of attention. I think we have a lot of work still to do in that area. And I think together, Citizens Behind the Badge and the National Black Sheriffs Association can do some good. So, Anthony, I'm so glad you reached out to me. So honored, really, that you're able to join us here today to talk about these important issues. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you for your platform and what you're doing. We have to step up and speak out on some of these issues because as the society is reshaping, we have to put the voice out there so folks can start kind of becoming more normalized to the way things are going to look. and to raise more attention on the importance of law enforcement in ensuring a civil society can operate that it needs to operate. So thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you so much for reaching out.
Again, it's Heroes Behind the Badge, sponsored by Citizens Behind the Badge. Citizens Behind the Badge is the leading voice of the American people in support of the men and women of law enforcement. For Heroes Behind the Badge, Craig Floyd and Bill Erfurt, we'll see you next time. This is Dennis Collins signing off.